Welcome to Tech Smarter. This is the show where we talk with operators, innovators, and investors who are shaping the future of aging services. I'm your host, Abby Ritchie, the tech guru at the Smarter Service. This episode is brought to us by Leading Age Arizona, and the show is brought to you by the Smarter Service. Now, if you are a senior living operator and you're struggling to provide dedicated tech services to your residents, I want you to DM me today because the Smarter Service has professionalized this growing challenge, and we would be more than happy to help you. And I'd like to go ahead at this point and then bring my guest on. Today we have Morgan Winter of Ziegler. Welcome to Tech Smarter, Morgan.
Thanks so much, Abby. Thanks so much for having me, and happy to be here speaking to the audience.
Yeah, 100%. Now, today we're going to be talking about investing in independence and the tech-enabled senior living future, which is just growing and growing and growing. And Morgan, could you please let people know what you do for Ziegler and how you happen to enter this industry?
Absolutely. So I'm currently a member of our principal investments and fund management team here at Ziegler. So in that role, I primarily support the Ziegler Linkage Funds, a family of venture capital style funds that are focused on innovation in senior living and aging services. So my path to venture capital was actually paved in the audit world. Before joining Ziegler in 2021, I specialized in audits of mutual funds and ETFs at Cohen and Company, which is a regional accounting firm based out in Cleveland. So that experience gave me a pretty deep foundation in fund accounting and operational workflows, which I now apply to our investment support and fund operations, including investor relations, execution of our strategic value, and that kind of thing. So I'm currently based in Milwaukee, where we are enjoying a lovely spring day. So happy to see the sunshine. And yeah, like I said, happy to be here with everyone.
Excellent, excellent. So you started in auditing, and how did your background in financial reporting shape your investor's eye today?
Yeah, so that transition was actually, I think, a bit more natural than many would think. So because I started my career, working with mutual funds and ETFs, which is a very precision and regulation heavy industry, while those are open-ended funds versus the closed-end funds that I work on today and therefore have some differences, the experience gave me some pretty deep exposure to the basic mechanics of, investment vehicles. Most importantly, I think it gave me an eye for the financial metrics that signal the true health of any organization. So in the age tech space, I know we're very fortunate to meet so many passionate, mission-driven founders. For those solutions, however, to really scale and have the most impact on the largest amount of people, I think we all know that the organization must have the right foundations and economics in place to truly be a viable investment. So I think my audit background really helps me look past the pitch, so to say, to ensure that those foundations are there.
Yeah, you know what? I have the opportunity of meeting a lot of founders as well, and so many of them are very heart-centered folks. They have firsthand come across a solution because they've seen a grandparent or a parent struggle deeply with a solution that's no longer fitting the need, and I just love to hear about their origin stories, to hear about why they developed this, and to see how they're able to scale it. One thing I've noticed in working and talking to a lot of founders is that sometimes when they've created this technology, it makes perfect sense in their minds, but if it's not actually helping an older adult in a simple way, it creates more friction than is necessary.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and so sometimes it's just about talking about how you can improve things on the end user side of the explanation. Nonetheless, now that you've been in senior living for a while, what would you say has been some of the biggest light bulb moments that you've seen come across, especially when it has to do with the ROI of technology in senior living?
Absolutely. I would say the biggest light bulb moment that we've really seen is that transition of tech from a nice to have or luxury amenity to a fundamental tool for operational survival, really. To put that into perspective, and I know I don't need to tell you or anyone here on the line how pervasive tech has become in the personal lives of older adults. I see it every day. I love my Nana. She's 82. She's an avid iPad user and typically the first to check in with her Wordle scores in our family group chat every day. But I think we can agree that the baseline has shifted to a point where infrastructure that was novel, 10 years ago, such as campus-wide Wi-Fi, is now a utility as essential as water or electricity. And I think we'd be challenged to find too many communities that aren't featuring that. So I think this broader consumer shift really pairs with the mindset shifts we're seeing for operators themselves. They're moving away from viewing tech as just another, expense line item to seeing tech platforms as crucial partners. An environment where we increasingly see, margin pressure and acuity creep with residents coming in requiring a higher level of care for the complex medical needs they have. Building these critical efficiencies, I think, is really the only path forward. I think the real light bulb moment happens when operators see that the right technology isn't just, something that's going to cost money, but something that can help them reclaim staff time, mitigate risk, and some of those, other crucial levers that are necessary to expand in this age.
Yeah, I like how you said technology is no longer a nice to have, but it's a need to have. And that's exactly how we see it at the Smarter Service. We have residents moving into their communities with, I would say, around 7 devices, give or take. There's so many of them. And so they're actually expecting the community to support them with that. And when they don't have that type of resident tech support and their questions don't get answered, all sorts of things happen that we've seen. We've seen fraud, we've seen breakdown, we've seen, a lack of adoption, not only with the devices that residents are coming into the community with, but also the technology that is being utilized at the community. So it is so much more than a need to have, though. I really see it like it's part of infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, there's still a fair amount of communities that are trying to piecemeal the solution together. And that is frustrating for everyone. It takes up a lot of staff time. It's frustrating for residents because they don't have their go-to person. There's often the activity director that ends up answering these questions, and they're not even technically adept. And so, or, available to help. And so, it's something that we've been trying to promote for quite a while. And I'm continuously looking for mass adoption in this area. So, yeah.
Yeah, so important. Yeah.
There are also some investment strategies that I know that you all take into account when you're looking at clinical healthcare versus IT lifestyle, for instance. What do you take into consideration when you're putting together a strategy for investment?
Absolutely. So I think it can, as we look at the broader ecosystem, it can really take, a couple different paths. On the one side, you have the targeted B2B solutions that are designed, to solve a specific challenging operational problem within senior living. I think that, these are the tools that are really making the business of care work. I think a perfect example of something like this is one of our portfolio companies, Cascala, which is an AI-enabled clinical intelligence platform. It focuses on the critical transition when a resident is moving between settings. So, for example, from hospital to post-acute care. When we evaluate a company like Cascala, we're looking at its ability to bridge those gaps between providers to evidently reduce hospital readmissions down the road and relieve some administrative burden. I think it's a solution that sells directly to operators and systems because their care teams, are able to then take the right care or take the right action at the right moment. On the other side of our strategy, we're kind of seeing those more broad, experience-driven platforms that improve the aging journey outside of the community walls, outside of the senior living community itself. These solutions often help seniors manage their own health, just kind of keep that independence as long as possible. So an example of a company we are invested in that does this is a company like Season Health, which is a food as medicine platform. It matches seniors with registered dietitians and then provides a marketplace for healthy meals tailored to their specific chronic conditions like diabetes or heart disease. So for an investment like Season Health, we aren't necessarily looking at how it integrates directly with a senior living community. Well, that would be great, of course. But we're also looking at the consumer engagement and clinical outcomes, how they're really moving the needle. So we're really asking, like, is this something that is helping someone stay healthy in their own kitchens? They don't, need that higher level of care that eventually it comes with more costs prematurely. So yeah, I would really say that our strategy there is a balance, and it really varies by the solution that come across our board.
Yeah, it sounds like successful aging at home, it requires a lot more than just hardware. It's sort of like a digital safety net. And it's like where perhaps the caregiver is really the best advocate for a lot of this type of technology.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we talk about caregiver shortages, and we know that that is a major problem in this industry, we seem to mention automation and efficiency as buzzwords for 2026. So beyond labor saving tools, what would you say is currently high on the list for Ziegler linkage that might actually surprise people?
Yeah, so I know we've been talking about caregivers and caregiver support, and so I think it's a theme that sits pretty high on the list, that looks at this space and the labor problem more broadly, with a much more human-centric lens, is a theme that we've called empowered care.
Okay.
I know we've heard of this recent fear, that in our rush to solve these labor shortages with the AI that's all sort of hype lately, and similar interventions, we might lose that human element that is truly the heart of our industry. We believe it's a really important innovation happening right now, at this critical intersection between autonomy and support. This includes tools that strengthen independence and agency for older adults while providing essential support to their entire care teams, including those family members at home, like a spouse or a son or a daughter, who's taking care of their older loved one. So I think the goal here is really to address and reduce the burnout that is so pervasive in the industry, across the care continuum, by actively improving decision making and quality of life for everyone involved. I think by streamlining that noise of caregiving through smarter resources, we are actually protecting that human connection, ensuring that the time spent between the caregiver and the older adult is focused on the person and not the process as much. So empowered care is actually the theme of something very dear to my heart, which is this year's John Hopper Impact Award. So this was an award we launched 4 years ago to honor the late Chief Investment Officer of our funds, John Hopper. And each year we accept nominations or self-nominations from entrepreneurs who are really moving the needle in age tech. So last year was the first year we introduced a dedicated thematic focus for the award, and we've shown a spotlight. Yeah, we've shown a spotlight on cognitive and behavioral health, and selected Bruce Elliott of Memory Lane Games as our winner. So nominations for that award are actually open right now. They're live on the awards website through April 17th. After that deadline, the awards selection committee will select 3 finalists, each of which who will head out to Mary Furlong's What's Next Longevity Summit in June in San Francisco, where we'll announce the winner, and have a reception and just an overall lovely event. So the winner then receives a invitation to our Ziegler Linkage Fund Symposium, which is an investor exclusive event we host in Chicago in July, as well as a 1-year advisor relationship with a leader of their choosing from our advisor pool. So yeah, we're very excited to review nominations and get to know some new innovative founders in the space.
I love that. I love that. How does this award really bridge the gap between something that's a good idea and a scalable solution?
Yeah, so I think looking at this gap, like, it's not necessarily something that's caused by a lack of vision, right? Like, we have plenty of vision, so many people looking to, extend the mission of this space. But I think the gap is really caused by, the complexity of the senior living landscape, and healthcare space as well, overall presenting a hurdle. I think that the founders, often have a brilliant product that solves a problem, but navigating the insider roadmaps of clinical workflows, staff adoption, maybe some fragmented systems, can be a pretty big undertaking for anyone, really. So this award bridges that gap by targeting candidates who are typically earlier in their journey and in their company journey than the companies we would typically invest in. And because they're at this earlier stage, they are at the perfect position to take full advantage of what we offer to the award winner with this award. So for example, that 1-year advisor relationship that I mentioned with a senior member of our network, whether it's a senior living leader, a member of the investor community, or a legal expert, is intended to go beyond mentorship to really help founders navigate specific hurdles that will often slow down growth in this sector. We also provide the winner with a platform for visibility by putting them directly in front of our limited partners at the symposium I mentioned in July. By facilitating that literal connection, I think between the early stage innovation and the infrastructure of our 160 or so provider investors, we really set them up to start making those strategic partnerships that they need for growth. So we really feel that we also feel that spreading the word for this award, the word theme really shines a light on companies that are making a difference in this space of empowered care this year.
Yeah. Are there any other technologies that you'd like to share with us that are empowering caregivers?
Yeah, so I think one of them from our portfolio directly is actually T-Care. So T-Care addresses the human element by focusing on the root cause of caregiver burnout, which they identify as identity discrepancy. So this happens when an adult child or a spouse feels a conflict between their familial role that they've been in their entire lives and their new role as a clinical caregiver that they find themselves in. So T-Care uses an evidence-based assessment to identify a caregiver's specific stress points and then provides a tailored action plan that connects them with the right resources at the right time. So for example, things like respite care or community support. By supporting the caregiver's mental and emotional health, the technology directly improves the resident's daily experience. When a caregiver is less stressed and feels more like a family member again, like they're used to being, they're able to provide a much more empathetic and present care level. So I think the clinical results of this approach are also really what show the impact on the residents. T-Care's model, and they've done some white papers, I believe, has been shown to delay nursing home placement by an average of 21 months, allowing seniors to maintain their independent agency in their own homes for much longer. So it's a perfect example of how empowering the person or the caregiver actually creates a more dignified and sustainable life for that person who's receiving care.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the more that we can empower caregivers, the more that we could cater to them, make things easier for them, the better overall the experience is for sure. When you're looking at different technologies to invest in, what's the kind of filter that you like to use?
Yes. So I think that a key thing is kind of looking past some of the flashier tech solutions. We all go to conferences and see the latest, greatest thing kind of up on the stage. And I think we kind of have to assess whether or not a solution can survive in the real world friction of a senior living environment. So we often see, these gadgets that look great, but, once they're actually in the setting and caregivers are using them, they fail because, the founder fails to see that caregiver is already doing 20 other tasks and simply doesn't have the time to navigate another dashboard. So I think that we kind of gravitate towards some more of the invisible technology. So solutions that slide into a current workflow a little more seamlessly and, remove steps from a caregiver's day versus adding additional ones. I think another key piece is those financial nuts and bolts that I talked about earlier. We are, of course, looking for clinical outcomes. Those are very important, but we're also looking at the return on investment and also, very importantly, return on caregiver time that an operator can actually take home to their board. So because we have a nice network of provider investors, we also have the unique ability to kind of pressure test some of these companies that end up in our investment pipeline and really ask them, critical questions like, is this solving a pain point that is material for you? Like, is this affordable to fit in your budget, or is your CFO going to come to you with questions and that kind of thing? So if it's too expensive or can't fit seamlessly into their workflows, it just won't pass the filter. So we're looking at those really resilient workflow-centered companies that prioritize outcomes over the cool factor of a gadget, while that is fun and, interesting and buzzy.
Do you ever use test beds to pressure test these investments?
Test beds? I don't believe so. Our conversations are a little more ad hoc, one-on-one with, some leaders that we typically know would either benefit or have experience in that area. But that's really interesting.
Yeah, as we start to invest more and more in AI, we're noticing that companies are focusing more on predictive rather than reactive. And so I'm curious, when you're collecting all this information, how are you seeing companies balance the need to really protect a resident's privacy in this situation?
Yes, that is such an important topic, and one that we actually studied a bit as part of our CTO hotline that was released by the fund and Leading Age Cast later last year. So, as part of that, we surveyed tech leaders at over 100 senior living organizations. And I think related to this topic, one of the most telling points that we encountered was legal and regulatory issues are actually the number one concern for senior living leaders when it comes to adopting AI. So I think further, the data noted that about a third of organizations already have some formal data governance program with documented policies. And as of the time of the survey, about 30% or so were in the process of building that. So clearly something that's very important. The industry is being very intentional about data, in my opinion. And as a result, I think tech companies are taking notes that operators don't just want to rush into data collection, but want to prioritize, the systems, the audit-ready platforms that build data governance into their DNA from the start. So I think the real balance between data privacy and insights comes down to utility. We have to ensure that we're not just collecting data for data's sake, but that it actually drives a decision or an outcome. I think we see the most successful tech partners as the ones that are helping operators bridge this gap by turning raw data into the insights that they can use to improve tangible things, like I know I already mentioned, staffing efficiency or safety. So by focusing only on the data that moves the needle for the business, I think we naturally will reduce that surveillance feel and ensure that a resident's privacy is respected and that we're not over collecting data just for the sake of having data. So yeah.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of people overlook the fact that a senior living community is like, it's part hospital, it's part hospitality, right?
Yes.
And so there is just such an emphasis on protecting someone's privacy in that situation, not just from a healthcare standard, but also from an intake evaluation. As you look ahead to the next 5 years and start looking at how the increase of tech savvy baby boomers are entering into the senior living system, what is something that could be changing for a more connected generation?
Yes, so I think that this trend has actually been a significant driver for how our zero linkage funds investment thesis has, really changed and evolved as we raised each consecutive fund. So it's a family of three. Fund one was a 2014 vintage, all the way up to Fund three, a 2021 vintage that we're actually still deploying capital out of into new portfolio companies. So if you look at Fund one, it was very focused on point solutions. So technologies, like I said, that solve a single specific operational problem within the four walls of a senior living community. That could be something like a staff scheduling app or a clinical documentation tool, those things that are all about improving efficiency and time savings on the ground. So as we've deployed capital more out of Fund three, I think we've significantly broadened that lens. So we're really focused on, we realize that the connected senior doesn't want to, move from their smart home where they have 10 or more devices they're using regularly into a community where they can't, bring all those things and live the lifestyle that they're accustomed to, really. So they expect a really seamless digital experience that follows them wherever they go, whether that's in their personal homes as more, older adults look to age in place or within the four walls of a senior living community. So I think because of that, rather than continuing to look at those point solutions, we are investing in innovations that touch on the entire aging experience, whether that's the health, wealth, autonomy, joy, social aspects, etc., which includes some of the companies that I've discussed here today. So we're really looking for the lifestyle ecosystem that allows the older adult to maintain their agency regardless of where they choose to live.
Yeah, 100%. And it kind of brings us back to what we talked to initially. Like, technology is no longer a nice to have, it's really a need to have. And like you mentioned, it's part of the infrastructure, and it's what today's residents are expecting 100%. You
Yeah.
know, Morgan, if people have any questions, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I would love if you just reach out to me via email. So my Ziegler email, I think, is down on the bottom of the screen there. And feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to set up time to connect or talk. Also out at the conference network and whatnot. So if you see me around the Ziegler booth at any time, feel free to stop by and give me a shout. So
you've got it. Thank you so much for joining us today. And for those of you that are joining us later in the chat, we thank you so much for your participation. And we are always open to any topic ideas that you'd like to see covered here on Tech Smarter. And we will see you all right back here next week for another episode. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.